Hey there. Tonight, we're going to journey back to one of the most beautiful and celebrated cities in human history, Renaissance Florence. You've probably seen the paintings, heard the names. Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, the Medici, and imagined the elegance of art, architecture, and culture blooming in golden light. But what if you were actually there? So get comfortable, dim the lights, and join us as we uncover why you probably wouldn't survive a day in Renaissance Florence, and what that tells us about the past and ourselves. What would it really feel like to walk the cobbled streets, breathe the air, live a single day as a common person in the shadow of greatness? Well, it turns out surviving even one day in Renaissance Florence might be far harder than you think. From crowded alleyways filled with waste and noise, to the ever-present risk of disease, harsh justice, and food shortages, daily life was anything but refined. Whether you were a child facing strict discipline, a woman bound by societal rules, or a craftsman struggling to make ends meet, Florence demanded strength, adaptability, and luck. In tonight's immersive exploration, we'll peel back the romanticized layers and see the gritty, vivid reality underneath the art. You awaken in the early morning light to the soft tolling of bells from the Duomo, their echo stretching through narrow streets, still cloaked in shadow. The city stirs to life slowly at first soft footsteps, shutters creaking open, the clatter of a pail against stone. You sit up on a straw-stuffed mattress tucked in the corner of your family's cramped room, located above a leather worker's shop. The scent of cured hides rises from below through the floorboards. It's a sharp, almost sour smell, and it's been your constant companion for as long as you can remember. One rears as a street urchin darts in front of it, begging for a coin. Laundry hangs from lines stretched between windows. The sun, peeking through gaps in the roofline, throws golden shards of light across the grime-covered ground. You step back to avoid being trampled and find yourself against the wall of a perfumery, where delicate jars of oil and rosewater are displayed behind iron bars. The contrast is stark luxury pressed up against desperation. Carts roll past without warning. Packs of dogs roam, rooting through refuse. A rat scurries by your foot, disappearing into a crack. You'd avoid this tangle of noise and smells altogether, but you're not. And so, like most Florentines, you walk. Below, laundry flaps on poles stuck out over the water. The streets narrow again, curving between ancient stone walls. You pass graffiti scrawled in charcoal, some political, some vulgar, some poems left by students of the university. A dead fish floats near a tangle of reeds. A ferryman yells at a boy who tries to jump aboard his skiff without paying. They reek of sweat and sawdust. Nearby, a man opens a tavern's shutter and tosses out the remains of a spoiled cask of wine. Church bells, barking dogs, gossiping women, shouting merchants. Every inch feels claimed by people, by smells, by voices, by history. It's not constant, but it comes in waves, crashing and retreating like the sea. Someone is ill on the second floor. The scent of vinegar and herbs clings to the air. Your boots are stained. Your hands smell of the market. Your lungs are heavy with soot and dust. And yet, this is home. The chaos of the streets is part of your very being. Florence is not kind, but it is alive. Fiercely, unrelentingly alive. A cat darts between your legs and disappears into the attic. And just as utterly, unforgettably Florence. And those things are here, behind closed doors in workshops and salons. But outside, in the streets, life is less glorious. It's practical, hard, messy. It's beautiful and terrible at once. Florence after dark is no place for the unarmed or the unlucky. Oil lamps flicker in some wealthier districts, but most alleys are swallowed by shadow. Crime festers where light fails. And besides, city guards hired by guilds and patricians don't concern themselves with the safety of common folk. One moment you might find a patch of calm shaded cloister, the quiet steps of a convent garden. But then a quarrel breaks out, or a horse rears, or a peddler bangs a pot to draw attention. The red trickle joins the other flows running down the sloped road, forming rivulets of grime. Shadows stretch long. Fires are lit indoors, and the scent of cooking onions, herbs, roasted meat drifts into the streets. But so too does the smoke. It clings to the walls and curls into corners. Breathing feels heavier. You smell wet stone and something earthy, rotting. An older man with yellowed eyes mutters to himself, clutching a sack under his arm. You keep walking. Children race one another in bare feet, shrieking with laughter. A woman sells ribbons and dyed fabrics from a stall propped against a church wall. Just beside her, a man peddles medicinal powders, some of which are little more than powdered chalk and promises. In rainy seasons it floods, turning streets into streams and cellars into lakes. In dry seasons it becomes sluggish, its banks caked with debris. The city relies on it for everything: drinking water, waste disposal, and washing, but it gives back disease and dampness in equal measure. As the sun rises higher over the red-tiled roofs, you lace your worn boots and step out into the street. The alleyway is barely wider than the span of your outstretched arms. Cracked stones lie uneven beneath your feet. Mud clings to the corners, mixed with ash, dust, and something fouler: last night's waste, tossed from a window in the hours before dawn. A voice above calls out in warning. Attenti sotto. Watch out below. You instinctively jump back as a slosh of dirty water, or worse, splashes into the street from a wooden bucket. The smell is immediate and sour. Human waste, urine, bits of food. This is the Renaissance version of Garbage Day, and it happens nearly every morning in Florence. You pass through the alley and emerge into a broader street, the Via del Corso, where merchants and beggars crowd together. Here the city feels alive, humming with energy, as though it were breathing. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer rings from a nearby workshop, mixing with the shrill calls of vendors hawking roasted chestnuts and herbs. A butcher lays out cuts of meat on a wooden slab beneath the open sky. Flies dance lazily above the glistening flesh. There is no ice to preserve it. He hopes to sell it all before noon, or it will have to be salted if it isn't spoiled already. Horses clatter past, their hooves sharp on the cobblestones. Your eyes scan upward. Buildings here lean over the street, their upper stories growing closer and closer, almost touching like neighbors whispering secrets. You move cautiously, not just because of the filth and noise, but because you must. The streets of Florence are no place for carelessness. There are no sidewalks, no traffic rules, no guards to protect you in most quarters. You duck into a side street quieter here, but darker too. The buildings cast long shadows. If you were a noble, you'd be carried through the chaos on a litter by servants. Your feet would never touch the muck. You cross one of the many small bridges spanning the Arno, the river cutting a slow, murky path through the city. The Arno, beautiful from a distance, is as unpredictable as the city it runs through. You continue uphill now, toward the artisan district where tailors, bookbinders, and sculptors work. A group of apprentices jostles past you, laughing loudly, their hands stained with ink and plaster. The sheer noise of Florence is overwhelming. As evening nears, the city takes on a different tone. You must be home before nightfall. As you wind back through the streets toward your home, you feel the city pressing in around you. Florence is not vast, but it is dense. It's easy to romanticize the Renaissance now. The genius of Michelangelo, the brushstrokes of Botticelli, the intellectual revolution of humanism. You arrive at your building and climb the worn stairs, past neighbors arguing about firewood and bread. You sit again on your straw mattress as the bells chime the evening hour. And as you drift to sleep to the sound of another fight outside your window, you know that tomorrow will be just as noisy, just as crowded, just as dangerous. You wait to the sound of footsteps creaking across the wooden floor above you, followed by the soft clink of metal, perhaps someone stoking a fire or pulling a kettle from the hook. A rooster crows in the distance, muffled by thick walls and narrow alleys. The morning is come. Your eyes open to the familiar dimness of your room. There's no curtain to pull aside, no glass window to welcome the sun. A single shelf above your head holds a wooden cup, a pewter spoon, and a beeswax candle burned almost to the end of its wick. Beside you, on the floor, sits a chamber pot, half covered with a wooden lid. It shocks you awake, cutting through the morning fog in your mind. If you want to see your reflection, you'll have to look into the river or polish a bit of metal. Vanity isn't much of a luxury for people like you. Besides, there are more pressing things to tend to like food. There is no soap, only a scrap of linen cloth to rub away the dirt and sleep. There is no chimney flue. Smoke simply escapes as best it can. On the far wall, a single religious icon hangs a painted panel of the Madonna and Child, the colors faded but lovingly dusted. If it lays an egg, it'll be divided among several people. Religion fills your life. Before eating, you may whisper a short prayer. On feast days, candles are lit and special food, if any, is placed beneath the icon as an offering. On cold days, the hearth is a comfort. On warm days, it makes the air thick and hard to breathe. Still, it's the heart of the home. The sounds of Florence drift upward, voices calling to one another, a bell ringing at the convent, a street musician plucking at a lute. They arrive unannounced, bearing news, bread, or simply company. Hospitality is simple but important. A bench is cleared, a bit of food shared, wine poured if available. Conversation circles around trade, illness, births, deaths, and politics. Always politics. In Florence, even the humblest citizens have opinions about the ruling families and their rivals. Children laugh and shout, chasing one another with sticks. A Renaissance home is not a palace, not a place of splendor. It is a place of survival, of love expressed through labor, of life lived close to the bone, and it is yours. You envy them, though you were one of them not long ago. Childhood ends quickly here. You huddle near it as you eat, the heat soaking into your hands and face. For your teeth, if you clean them at all, it's with a stick chewed soft at one end, dipped in salt or ashes. A sniffle can become a fever, a cough something worse. There are no hospitals for people like you, only faith, herbs, and luck. Smoke, sweat, spices, and sewage all find their way inside. You get used to it. You have to. Your home may have a bundle of dried lavender or sage hanging from the ceiling, believed to ward off sickness. Dinner is eaten in near silence, interrupted only by the occasional cough or prayer. The shutters are closed. The candle is lit. The chamber pot is emptied and returned. You settle again into the straw, pull the blanket tight, and listen to the sounds of your home. Breathing, snoring, the crackle of the hearth. Outside, Florence continues to live and breathe, but here, in this small room, the world narrows to warmth, darkness, and dreams. In times of plague, vinegar-soaked rags are tied at the windows, and the doors are sealed with prayers. Washing is hard work, especially in winter, when the cold bites at your fingers until they go numb. Morning begins in darkness, continues with tasks, and pauses only for the midday meal, if there is one. After that, more chores, more work, more survival. Tasks are assigned not by age or gender alone, but by strength and availability. Everyone must contribute. Soap, if you use it, is homemade, lye-based, and harsh on the skin. The wealthier families live in towers and multi-story buildings, with workshops below and living spaces above. Your family's quarters are modest. Below you, your father may already be at work in his cobbler's bench, or perhaps your mother is preparing food in the hearth room. Mid-morning means the shops open and the streets fill. Before then, you have chores. Perhaps you fetch water from the well, standing in line with neighbors as they gossip and complain. The well is deep and dark, its ropes frayed from constant use. The water isn't always clean. It smells faintly of minerals, and sometimes worse, but it's what you have. The smell of smoke wafts upward, a sign that the fire's been lit. It's already been used once in the night. The air near it is sharp and acrid. You make a note to empty it later. You pass the family's single shelf of possessions. 2 plates, a few ceramic jars, some dried herbs hung from a nail. In the hearth room, the coals have been raked together, and a pot is beginning to simmer. Perhaps it holds porridge made from barley or millet, flavored with nothing but a pinch of salt if you're fortunate. Meat is rare, eggs rarer still. Most mornings, you eat bread dense, dark, and slightly sour. If it's too hard, you dip it in the pot to soften it. Instead, a wooden shutter blocks the morning light, cracked slightly open to let in a sliver of brightness and a gust of the cool, damp Florentine air. If you're lucky, you share this room with only 1 or 2 other siblings, perhaps, or aging relatives. If you're not so lucky, there could be 5 or more bodies crammed into this tiny space, sleeping head to foot on the straw. Privacy is nearly non-existent. You've learned to dress under your blanket or wait your turn. The room smells faintly of soot, old wood, and the musty scent of straw. If you wish to wash, you'll need to ladle it from the ceramic jug in the corner, kept full from the communal well down the street. You push the blanket aside and shiver as your bare feet meet the cold stone floor. You reach for your tunic, folded beside the bed, and pull it over your head. It's made of rough-spun wool, thick and itchy, but it keeps you warm. Your hose woolen leggings are tucked into your boots from the day before. You sniff them briefly, still tolerable. The walls are stone, plastered over and painted once long ago. Now the color has faded, peeling in patches where the moisture from the river air has eaten into it. You shift beneath the heavy wool blanket. The mattress beneath you is little more than a sack of straw. It's flattened in places, lumpy in others, and rustles every time you move. It smells a little sour, having absorbed years of sweat and moisture. You've learned to sleep around its discomforts. Your head rests on a linen-stuffed pillow, a rare comfort you guard closely. There are no sheets to speak of, just your cloak thrown over you for extra warmth in the colder months. The room is small, no larger than a storage closet by modern measure. You stretch and rub your eyes, adjusting slowly to the light and chill. There is no running water here. Washing is quick. You pour a little of the cold water into a shallow bowl and splash your face. There's no mirror in the room, nor would you expect one. You slip into your boots, cracked leather with worn soles, and tiptoe across the floor. The house itself is narrow and vertical, like many in Florence. Descending the stairs takes care. They're steep and uneven, made of stone worn smooth by generations of feet. The fire smokes more than it burns, leaving soot streaks up the chimney and across the ceiling. As you chew, you glance around the room. The table is rough-hewn wood, stained and scarred from years of use. The benches creak beneath you. You might have a pet-a-cat to chase rats, or a chicken kept inside overnight for safety. It clucks softly in a corner, ruffling its feathers. There's no clock to mark the hour. You tell time by the sun, the bells of the nearby church, or the habits of the city. If you live near the Arno, you might wash clothes in its waters, slapping linen against stones while keeping an eye out for floating refuse. Other days, you sweep the floor with a bundle of reeds, chase rats from the corners, or carry goods to the market for your parents. In your free moments, you might peer out the shutter and watch the world pass by. Occasionally, the home is visited by relatives or friends. Illness is a constant concern. The structure of your day is shaped by necessity and ritual. As the day goes on, The home slowly fills with the smells of the city. The walls are thick, but not sealed. When evening returns, so does the family. The fire is stoked once more. And as your eyes grow heavy, you know this is what life is. Small comforts, shared spaces, routines built on endurance. You wake with a start as the sun slips through the gaps in the wooden shutters, spilling golden light across the stone floor. The first breath you draw in Renaissance Florence is a shock to the system. The street is a blur of movement. Carts creak past, their wheels grinding against cobblestone. Merchants shout. Waste disposal is still rudimentary. Chamber pots are emptied directly into the street gutters, sometimes with little warning to those below. A practiced guardate is often the only notice before the contents are flung from a second-story window. They may have courtyards with fountains and perfumed water, but the air finds its way in through cracks and doors, filling the halls with traces of the street outside. In markets like the Mercato Vecchio, the smell is more complex fish, laid out on wooden stalls in the heat, blood dripping from fresh cuts of meat, baskets of onions and garlic mingling with sweet fruit and pungent cheese. It's a fragrant tapestry of survival, trade, and necessity. Some city officials have tried to control chimney heights or restrict certain trades to specific quarters, but enforcement is patchy. Step into a church during a packed sermon, and you will find the air inside thick with incense, sweat, and smoke from candlelit chapels. But it's brief, fragile. The smoke and smell return quickly, settling back into their rightful place like old kings on a throne. The majesty of a painted ceiling can hardly distract you from the press of unwashed bodies and the sluggish, recycled breath of 100 congregants. And yet, the Renaissance bloomed in this very air. Genius found a way to breathe despite it. Perhaps the discomfort sharpened the senses. Or perhaps it was simply endured because there was no alternative. For Florentines, this is normal. They might notice a particularly foul week or grumble when the tanning pits are especially active, but no one expects clean air. The concept of air as a health concern exists only in vague humoral theory. Bad smells might be called miasmas, blamed for illness, but the cure is rarely about removing the cause. Instead, people carry posies of herbs, wear scented pouches, or burn aromatic resins to cleanse their surroundings. Wealth buys better airflow. The poor, crammed into tenements or working by open flame, simply endure. Children grow up with chest ailments. Artisans lose years of life inhaling smoke and dust. There are no filters, no respirators. The best you can do is tie a cloth over your face, but even that feels like a whisper against the storm. You're just visiting, and Renaissance Florence does not wait for you to adjust. There is beauty in the abundance, but it's layered with rot just beneath the surface. Fires are stoked again for warmth and food, and the smoke starts its nightly dance over the rooftops. You find yourself lying awake on a straw mattress, the acrid bite of the day still lingering in your throat. You wonder how long it would take to stop noticing. A week? A month? A lifetime? The interiors may be sweetened with herbs like rosemary or lavender tucked into rushes on the floor, but this is only a mild distraction, not a solution. The human nose is adaptable. Yes, but you are a stranger here. Your body is not used to the sheer intensity of living, so close to the functions of survival. You might find yourself coughing by midday, your throat raw, your eyes stinging. The smoke from dozens of open hearths doesn't just flavor the air, it colors it. The light that filters down between narrow alleys is often tinged yellow or gray. And the longer you stay, the more you realize it's not a momentary discomfort. This is life in Florence, and it does not care for your lungs. Rain helps wash the filth away, but on dry days, it dries and crumbles into dust that coats your shoes, your clothes, and eventually your tongue. The clatter of hooves echoes from stone walls, and everything is wrapped in a haze of smoke and dust. Wood fires fuel every kitchen and workshop. their soot rising in lazy spirals above the rooftops. Chimneys belch out their exhaust without restriction, and few are tall enough to vent the smoke properly. It often drifts sideways, curling into windows and sneaking into homes. It is thick, oily, and strange. Before you even swing your legs over the bed, the atmosphere clings to your lungs like damp cloth, choking and acrid, pungent in ways that defy easy description. This is not the crisp, sanitized air of modern cities. This is Florence in the 15th century, raw, living, and unfiltered. From the moment you step outside, it becomes painfully clear. Clean air is a luxury, and one you will not find here. Then there's the animal smell, an ever-present mixture of horse dung, pig slop, and the tongue of human waste. Florence is famed for its tanning industry, which adds another layer to the city's unique scent. On certain streets, the stink of rotting hides and ammonia from fermented urine used to soften leather hangs in the air like a fog. It burns your nostrils, so strong you can taste it. Many of the workshops are clustered near the Arno River, and as the wind shifts, that reek can spread far beyond the artisan quarters. It's the kind of odor that lingers, embedding itself into your clothes, your hair, even your thoughts. You might expect the homes of the wealthy to be an escape, but even the grandest palazzos cannot shut out Florence's breath. Public spaces are not immune either, and still you breathe it in. You have no choice. The very air is political, too. Regulations exist. Florence is no stranger to attempts at citywide order. It's not just the street or the workshop. Even sacred spaces are affected. Occasionally, a cool breeze drifts down from the hills or off the river, and the city exhales just a little. Perhaps the most disorienting part is how little anyone here complains. You might wonder how anyone managed to paint, write poetry, or study philosophy with this constant assault on the senses. By nightfall, the air cools, but it does not clear. But you're not from here. You wake to a growling stomach, but if you think breakfast will be hearty and filling, think again. You're in Renaissance Florence, and meals are not about indulgence. They're about survival. For most Florentines, food isn't the first priority of the day. Getting to the market on time, preparing for labor, or attending Mass often comes before a proper meal. If you're lucky enough to get something before heading out, it will likely be a chunk of coarse bread, dry, and slightly sour, made from barley, rye, or sometimes wheat if you're fortunate. Broad beans, chickpeas, lentils, dried and soaked overnight, boiled into hearty stews called minestra or zuppa. You might catch a bit of pork in a stew on special feast days. Occasionally, offal, kidneys, livers, even tripe, makes it into the pot, sold cheaply because the wealthier classes don't want it. Chicken or rabbit might grace your table if you raise it yourself or receive it in trade. Fish is more common, especially salted cod and sardines. Cooks in these homes are skilled in the art of transforming simple ingredients into lavish dishes. Spoilage is common, and food poisoning, though poorly understood, lurks as a constant threat. If you've worked a long day, this is your reward. Something warm, something shared, and a moment to rest. Meals are taken communally. Whether seated on benches around a long wooden table or huddled around a fire in a single-room dwelling, eating is not solitary. It's social. Stories are told, grievances aired, and even the simple act of chewing in peace feels like a pause in the rhythm of labor. The smell or taste of decay may be disguised with spices or vinegar, but it cannot be undone. None of the staples you take for granted exist in Florence yet. The Columbian exchange hasn't reached this city's kitchens. And in Renaissance Florence, luxury is not what is on your plate. It is whether you have a plate at all. What you have is rooted in the soil of Tuscany. Simple, seasonal, humble. Infants are breastfed if possible, though wet nurses are common in elite homes. It connects the peasant with the poet, the artisan with the aristocrat. It sustains not just bodies, but culture. Recipes are passed down, not just for flavor, but for survival. And every meal, no matter how small, is a triumph over the day's demands. The church calendar dominates the year, with fasts and feasts shaping what you can eat and when. On fast days, meat is forbidden, replaced by fish or simpler fare. During festivals, whole pigs are roasted in the piazza, and families might receive loaves of bread as charity from guilds or religious groups. Carnival brings sweet fritters, fried dough, and honey, delights that are quickly devoured and long remembered. Porridge or soaked bread is given to toddlers. Malnutrition is a quiet shadow in every poor household. Rickets, weak bones, and stunted growth are visible across the city. There's no vitamin chart, no supplements, no fortified cereal. You eat what you have. You survive if you can. There are no expiration dates. You eat and hope for the best. Spices imported from the East, cinnamon, nutmeg, saffron, are used liberally to show off one's wealth. Sugar, a luxury good, appears in unexpected places. Spiced meats, almond pastries, even preserved fruits. Banquets involve many courses, from soups to meat to fruit and nuts, and the contrast between rich and poor becomes stark at the table. Fresh fish is reserved for those close to the river or with deeper purses. A poor man's stew and a nobleman's capon both nourish, but they tell different stories. One whispers of scraping by, the other of dominion. These dishes fill the belly and provide protein, even if they lack variety. Cheese, particularly hard varieties like pecorino, becomes an essential source of nutrition and keeps well. It's plain, hot, and filling, ladled out onto wide boards and eaten with a spoon, if you have one. Sometimes it's flavored with a few bits of cheese or herbs. Often, it's not flavored at all. Eggs, laid daily by backyard hens, are a small blessing. But again, they're not for daily indulgence. If you're a child, a soft egg may be given to you when you're sick. If you're a worker, you'll have to earn your right to one through labor. They're sometimes flavored with garlic, onions, or the occasional herb, depending on what's growing or what you've saved from the garden. Olive oil, if you can afford it, is the preferred fat, but rendered pork fat is often used instead among the less fortunate. If you're a craftsman, you return home from the workshop briefly to eat with family. If you're a laborer, you might grab a crust and a flask of wine and sit in a shady courtyard. The wine, always diluted, I send to you luxury. It's safer than water and often part of your wage if you re-employed by a larger household or workshop. You might soften it in a cup of watered-down wine, the most common drink, not because of taste, but because water, more often than not, is unsafe to drink. Unless you belong to the upper crust of society, food is more a matter of scraping together what's available than savoring what's delicious. Most bread is dense, gritty, and often stale. You head down narrow lanes toward the Mercato Vecchio or Sant'Ambrogio, depending on your neighborhood. The smells are powerful. Fish packed in salt, hunks of meat hanging from hooks, wheels of cheese sweating in the summer heat. But you don't fill a shopping basket and stroll with leisure. You haggle, you wait, you hope. Fresh produce and goods come at a cost, and prices change with the season, weather, or political disruptions. It contains remnants of bran and even ground-up husks. Milling is crude, and small stones are not uncommon in your bite. Dental care doesn't exist in any recognizable form, and chipped teeth from hard bread are a common complaint. Still, bread is sacred. Even the poor revere it, and nothing is wasted. Morning starts early, and so does the work. Bread is the bedrock of the Florentine diet. But don't imagine a crusty artisan loaf with soft centers. By mid-morning, the city's markets are alive with chatter and bartering. If you're poor, beans are your best friend. Meat, for most people, is rare. Dairy is a gamble. Milk spoils quickly in the Italian heat, and without refrigeration, it sours by midday unless turned into cheese. One of the few universally available foods is polenta, boiled cornmeal, though in Florence before maize arrives from the New World, it's made from spelt or other grains. Lunch, the largest meal of the day, may happen around midday. In wealthier homes, the meals are more varied. Noble and merchant families dine on roasts, pies, sweet and savory courses. But even for the rich, food safety is precarious. Preservation methods are rudimentary: salting, smoking, pickling. As the day wanes, supper comes, usually lighter than lunch, sometimes a reheating of the same stew or bread and cheese. Children don't have special menus. They eat what the adults eat, or what's left over. Feast days and religious holidays offer rare moments of abundance. Food, you realize, is not just sustenance here. It's class, it's health, it's ritual, it's identity. As you sit by candlelight, picking at a crust and sipping the last of your wine, you think about what you didn't eat today. No chocolate, no coffee, no tomatoes, no corn, no potatoes. And perhaps that's what surprises you most. Despite the hunger, the risk, and the sameness, there is pride in this food. It is honest. But as your stomach grumbles again, still unsatisfied, you're reminded, you're not from here. Your body hungers for what it once had. The first thing you notice when you arrive in Renaissance Florence, invention, the art, or the architecture. It's the smell. A warm, sour mixture of sweat, rot, chamber pots, dung, fish, tallow smoke, and the sharp bite of tannery runoff. There's no running water, no sewer system. Just the Arno River, sluggish and brown, carrying away everything people no longer want. You wrinkle your nose, but the locals don't even flinch. They've lived in it their whole lives. This, for them, is normal. But what you dawn to realize, not immediately, is that this smell isn't just unpleasant. It's dangerous. It clings to your clothes, your skin, your breath. Outbreaks return regularly. In 1363, 1374, 1400, 1430, 1448. Each time it comes, people flee if they can. The rich escape to country villas. The poor, like you, stay and hope. The Ospedale degli Innocenti houses abandoned babies. The Santa Maria Nuova, a grand institution, tries to care for the ill, but with limited tools. Beds are shared. Bleeding bowls are reused. Surgeons are few. Most doctors are apothecaries or priests. Diagnosis depends more on astrology than anatomy. There's no stethoscope, no thermometer, no understanding of infection. Any of these could mean the end. And so people pray. They fast. They burn incense. They wear amulets, dried rose petals, wax charms, relics of saints. Women tend to sick with herbs passed down through generations. Not all healing comes from doctors. Some comes from mothers, from midwives, from widows who know which teas to boil and when to whisper prayers. There's wisdom hidden in every kitchen garden, every bundle of dried lavender, every drop of rosemary oil. The church offers solace, but even it can't explain why one child dies and another survives. The mystery of suffering is never solved. The mother lies on a straw mattress, her skin blotched and darkening. The father paces, praying aloud. A small child coughs in the corner. No one knows if they'll live. You feel helpless. You want to offer help, but there's nothing to give. You're not immune. You know that. Even standing in the doorway could seal your fate. Plague doesn't just kill. It unravels the very fabric of life. Shops close, bells toll. You think about how many people you've passed today who might already be sick. Because life doesn't stop for illness. It bends, but it doesn't break. That sanitation and clean water save lives. You feel the distance between their world and yours, and it weighs on you. No hotline to call, no pharmacy open late. Just the long, dark silence of a city haunted by centuries of sickness, praying that the morning comes. Because in this world, being sick is not just unfortunate, it's often a death sentence. Florence persists. It always has. And its people, even in the shadow of plague, find ways to endure. There's no real quarantine, no tests, no vaccines, no warning, just a sudden turn of fate. Bodies are buried in mass graves, sometimes without last rites. Others wander the streets, muttering, blessed or cursed, depending on who you ask. Epileptics are thought to be possessed. Depression is considered a spiritual failing. There are no words for schizophrenia or trauma. Pain is either physical or moral, and treatment ranges from confession to beating. Artists paint images of death and repentance. Dancers wear skull masks during carnival. There's no dentist. A bad tooth means pain, dull, then sharp and unbearable. The local barber surgeon might extract it with iron pincers, holding you down as he twists and pulls. There's no numbing, just clove oil, prayers, and hope. If the wound festers, there's no stopping the infection. A simple molar can kill. A fascination with mortality seeps into culture. Memento mori, reminders that death is always near. There's no antiseptic, no tetanus shot. A child playing in the mud could be dead in a week from something you de-treat with a bandage and cream. There's no margin for error. Health is fragile. Life is cheap. You begin to understand. Fear of illness shapes every part of life here. It controls who you visit, what you eat, how you worship. Priests go house to house with candles and incense, but they're often the first to die. No one wants to touch the sick. Families are torn apart. Mothers abandon children. Husbands die in separate beds. And when the pestilence passes, the streets are quieter, emptier, but never clean. It seeps into your food. And every breath you take carries with it the invisible threat of illness. Bring out your dead, they call, though few respond. Many don't want to admit sickness at all. To be marked is to be quarantined. They focus on charity, on preparing your soul. Death is always hovering. You'll be told to confess, to make peace with God. If you live, it's divine will. If you don't, your name is added to the ledgers and your body wrapped in linen. No autopsy, no answers. You'll be locked in your house, windows boarded, guards posted outside. No one will enter. No one will help. Women give birth, knowing they may not survive the bleeding or the fever afterward. Children grow up thin, pale, missing teeth, covered in lice. Men limp from untreated injuries, coughing constantly, spitting into rags. Leprosy, though rarer now, still lurks in the corners. The lazaretti, leper houses, remain just outside the walls. You'll die in the dark, and when they finally open your doors, they'll burn your mattress, throw lime on the floors, and say prayers for your soul. Florence in the 15th century is not a healthy place. Illness is constant. Disease is everywhere. You're not just worried about one plague. You're worried about dozens of them. In your world, you'd reach for a glass of water, a painkiller, a lozenge. It's year-round. In summer, there's sweating sickness, sudden, fierce, and terrifying. In winter, coughs deepen into consumption, what we now call tuberculosis. Then there's dysentery, typhoid, malaria from the nearby swamps, and smallpox that disfigures children and kills them in silence. The causes are unknown. The treatments often worse than the disease. Doctors recommend purging, bleeding, applying leeches. They prescribe concoctions of crushed pearls, dried lizard, or powdered gold, remedies more symbolic than scientific. Here, none of those things exist. You might chew a bit of dried herb or sip watered wine, but the symptoms don't go away. They fester. Your neighbors murmur about fever. They step away from you in the market. Even a cold can be deadly. There are no antibiotics, no hand sanitizer, no idea of germs at all. People believe in miasmas, foul airs rising from rotting matter, and humors, those four mysterious fluids that must be kept in balance. When you get sick, it's often seen as your fault. Maybe you overate. Maybe you sinned. Maybe your blood is too hot. Whatever the reason, medicine can do little to help. You wake one morning with a scratchy throat and a pounding head. Illness in Florence is not isolated to a season. And looming over it all is plague. The Black Death has already swept through Florence in 1348, killing half the city. But that wasn't the end. You hear it before you see it. The clatter of wheels, the low chant of the dead cart rolling through the alleys. Hospitals exist, but they are nothing like what you imagine. If you do visit a hospital, you may be fed broth and allowed to rest, but don't expect miracles. And yet, somehow, life goes on. People live with illness the way they live with bad weather or high taxes. It's part of the background. You learn to look for signs. Red spots on the skin, swollen glands behind the ears, a blackened toe, a shaking hand. During major outbreaks, the city changes. Streets are barricaded. Travelers are turned away. Entire districts go silent. And yet there's resilience too. Families nurse their own. You wonder what it's like to get a toothache here. And skin infections? Scratches? You notice how quickly wounds become dangerous. And what about the mentally ill? They're not cared for. They're feared. Some are locked away. You visit a household struck by plague. The curtains are drawn. The air inside is heavy. As you walk back into the sunlight, your thoughts spiral. And yet, people keep going. They laugh. They marry. They make bread. They sing. You, however, carry a knowledge they do not. You know that bacteria are real, that viruses exist. You tuck yourself into bed that night, head throbbing, wondering if it's just a cold or something worse. And there's no one to ask. You wake before dawn to the low chant of bells echoing from a nearby church tower. The air is heavy with the chill of the early morning, your body still sore from the day before. But there's no time to rest, because in Renaissance Florence, if you weren't already moving, you were falling behind. Work isn't a matter of preference here. It's a necessity, and not the kind of structured, neatly timed employment you might imagine. Labor is long, physical, and woven tightly into a hierarchy that leaves little room for failure. Most Florentines live and die by their trade. Entire families rely on the income from workshops, where dozens of hands work in rhythmic unison. You might even be admitted into the guild, but even then, you're not safe. If their tools are stolen, there's no one to help them. Others sweep ashes in blacksmith forges or carry goods for porters. These jobs are exhausting, dangerous, and rarely permanent. You work from sunrise to sunset, often by candlelight if the job demands it. When a guild hall hosts a feast, or a master hangs his family's emblem on his shop, it's a celebration of skill, of belonging. To be part of a guild is to be part of Florence itself. The city thrives because of its tradesmen, its apprentices, its laborers. Shouts from your master. But if you endure, if you learn, if you earn your place, then maybe, just maybe, you'll survive another day in Renaissance Florence. Behind every painting in a chapel, every finely bound book, every velvet robe, is a network of workers you'll rarely see. Holidays might provide a brief respite, but most of the time, your hands are your life. If they blister, you bind them and keep working. If your body aches, you grit your teeth and press on. One slip of the hand can mean the end of a career. Without family connections or the right master, you may be stuck doing these kinds of tasks your entire life. The girl whose needlework wasn't up to standard. The aging tanner whose hands gave out. They are more than decorations. They are lifelines. Without them, you are invisible. Your work is your identity. And losing it means slipping into the margins of a society that already asks too much. In Florence, if you couldn't work, you couldn't eat. If they're cheated by a customer, they have no court to appeal to. Florence is not a kind city to those who live outside the rules. Guilds demand constant dues, enforce strict quality control, and protect their members by keeping outsiders out. Competing against a member of another guild is forbidden. Selling unlicensed wares can land you in court. And if you step out of line, your livelihood can be revoked. Yet the quality standards are exacting, and one mistake, one poor stitch, one misaligned pattern can mean starting over. Some apprentices never advance. Some are sent home in shame. Some run away. Whether you are a baker, a tanner, a tailor, a sculptor's apprentice, or a wool comber, your life is ruled by a strict routine. But before you can even enter a trade, you must first find a way into the complex, often competitive world of the guild's powerful associations that control every aspect of production, regulation, and quality in Florence. These guilds, or arti, are the gatekeepers of survival. If your father is a craftsman, chances are you've been apprenticed since age 10 or 12. Others take jobs as domestic servants in wealthy households, rising before their mistresses to light fires, carry water, and clean chamber pots. In poorer homes, girls help their mothers with market stalls or learn to sew. Only the daughters of wealthy families, those tied to merchant, dynasties, or noble names, have any chance of avoiding labor entirely. These men are educated, well-dressed, politically powerful. They're the elites, the ones who walk past you without looking down. Then there are the arti minori, the lesser guilds where butchers, blacksmiths, shoemakers, and tanners scrape by. These guilds are crowded, hierarchical, and often rife with competition. You're far more likely to belong to one of these. Perhaps you live with your master. You clean his workshop. You sweep floors. You stir dyes. Your days begin with hauling heavy bolts of wool, soaking them in vats, pressing out the water, combing fibers by hand. It's grueling work, and your back aches constantly. Your fingers are cracked and stained from the lanolin and lye. But if you show promise, and your master is kind or ambitious, you might be allowed to try your hand at the loom in a year or two. You feed the fire. You learn by watching. You keep quiet unless spoken to. You hope desperately that after many years of labor, you'll be allowed to join the guild yourself. That badge on your sleeve is more than just a symbol. It's your protection, your access to markets, your reputation. Without it, you're no one. There are two classes of guilds in Florence. The arti maggiori, the major guilds include bankers, judges, notaries, silk merchants, and physicians. Let's say you've been apprenticed to a weaver. Being a weaver is no small task. Florence's wealth was built on textiles, especially wool. If you're lucky enough to master the loom, or your parents pay the right fees, you may earn the status of journeyman. Artisans without guild protection are in even worse shape. They work in the shadows, unregistered, with no access to markets or legal protections. Meanwhile, young men and boys flood into the city every year hoping for work. Some wind up hauling stone in the building trades. For women, options are even more limited. Some work in the textile trades, spinning thread or embroidering garments. And labor in Florence isn't just hard, it's relentless. There's no weekend, no 8-hour day. Yet despite the hardship, there is pride. Pride in craft. Pride in guild membership. Pride in surviving another day. But for every success story, there are hundreds of failures. The man who didn't finish his apprenticeship. As you walk through the city, notice the signs above shop door symbols of scissors for tailors, looms for weavers, shears for barbers. So tonight, as you close your eyes and rest your tired body on a lumpy straw mattress, remember tomorrow will be the same. Long hours, cold water, blisters. Public punishment in Renaissance Florence was more than just law enforcement. It was a spectacle designed to reinforce social order and instill fear in the hearts of all who witnessed it. Justice was harsh, swift, and often deeply humiliating. Suddenly, a procession arrives. Criminals or those accused of offenses are marched through the streets, sometimes chained or dressed in humiliating costumes, forced to endure hours or days, exposed to the elements, and to the jeers and sometimes stones of onlookers. This isn't just a punishment of pain, but one of humiliation. To be seen as a criminal was to be socially dead, your honor shattered. Political unrest, which was frequent in Florence's turbulent history, was met with severe punishments designed to discourage rebellion. Crowds would gather eagerly to witness executions or public floggings, events that doubled as grim entertainment and warnings. The church often played a role in these ceremonies, reminding the populace that moral order was sanctioned by divine will. Such episodes could erupt suddenly, with lynchings or public beatings, reinforcing the precariousness of life for anyone suspected of wrongdoing. You could be seized for merely speaking out against the ruling class or participating in an unauthorized gathering. The consequences ranged from imprisonment to exile, but the fear of public punishment was a powerful deterrent. You learned to watch your words, mind your actions, and avoid the city's watchful eyes. Yet behind the spectacle was a human cost, lives altered by shame, families torn apart by punishment, and a society built on fear as much as faith. Their shame is on full display, an example to all. The sound of shouting crowds mixes with the clatter of wooden stocks or iron shackles. Social status could mean the difference between leniency and brutality. Nobles and wealthy merchants often escaped the harshest penalties, relying on bribes or connections. In contrast, the poor and marginalized were disproportionately punished. This inequality deepened social divisions and resentment, but maintained the elite's grip on power. The authorities used public spaces like piazzas and marketplaces to stage punishments, making sure everyone saw the consequences of breaking the law. You quickly learn that in Florence, the rule of law is less about private judgment and more about public display. These performances were less about truth and more about power, persuasion, and the reinforcement of social norms. Being convicted was not just a legal outcome. It was a public condemnation that shaped your identity and future. Those guilty of theft, fraud, or other crimes might be branded with hot irons, a mark that would follow them for life. Every punishment served to remind the citizens that their actions were monitored, and that stepping out of line came with very public consequences. Others could be forced to wear a San Benito, a special garment marking them as heretics or criminals during public penance. This garment, often decorated with flames or devils, was meant to signal moral failure and invite public scorn. Imagine standing in the bustling heart of the city as the sun rises, the square filling with merchants, workers, and passers-by. One of the most common punishments is the pillory or stocks, where offenders are locked in wooden frames, hands and head trapped. But the punishments in Florence went beyond stocks. Justice was also dispensed through fines, imprisonment, or forced labor. But when it came to public order, spectacle was everything. The more severe the crime, the more dramatic the punishment. Even minor offenses could lead to public shaming. For example, a woman caught gossiping or engaging in inappropriate behavior might be paraded through the streets or forced to wear a sign declaring her offense. The city's authorities did not take kindly to dissent or disorder. Despite the cruelty, these punishments were part of the daily rhythm of city life. However, the justice system was not always fair or consistent. In some cases, local communities took justice into their own hands through vigilante actions or mob violence, especially when the formal system was seen as corrupt or ineffective. You might also encounter court rituals where trials were held publicly, often with dramatic speeches from prosecutors and defendants alike. As you move through Renaissance Florence, it becomes clear that justice was as much about spectacle and control as it was about law. The fear of public humiliation and harsh penalties shaped behavior. It kept many in check, but it also bred anxiety and distrust. This system of justice, brutal and unforgiving, was designed to maintain order in a city of conflicting interests, crowded streets, and fragile alliances. The church was the heartbeat of Renaissance Florence. Its presence infused every corner of your daily life, guiding your actions, your thoughts, and even your fears. You quickly realized that religion isn't just a private affair. It is woven deeply into the fabric of society, controlling not only your spiritual well-being, but your social standing and even your survival. From the ringing of the church bells at dawn to the rhythm of feast days and confessions, the church dictated the pace and meaning of your existence. Imagine waking early to the pealing of bells across the city, each toll marking a sacred hour. These bells summon you to prayer, signal the start of Mass, or warn of approaching danger. Their sound is so familiar that you barely notice it, yet it anchors the day's activities. They provide spiritual guidance, but also control education, health care, and even welfare. You might turn to a priest for advice on everything from marriage to business disputes, trusting their word as law. Fear of witches, demons, and the devil lurks beneath daily life, fueled by sermons and popular stories. The church's reach extends beyond doctrine into the realm of the supernatural, shaping your fears and hopes. Life moves with the church's calendar. Holy days, fasts, and feasts shape everything. Processions honoring saints fill the streets with color and music, while sermons preach messages about morality, justice, and piety. Its bells ring, its teachings echo in conversations, and its gaze watches from every altar and pulpit. Your identity, your community, and your very future are tied to how you live within this world, shaped by faith, fear, and devotion. Yet beneath the joy, there is a constant undercurrent of control. The church uses these events to remind the populace of its power and the necessity of obedience. When the festival of Easter or Christmas approaches, a city changes. Markets bustle with special foods, streets fill with processions, and even the poorest dress in their best. In times of hardship, illness, or loss, it provides a structure for mourning and hope. While many sincerely believe, others quietly question or push boundaries, seeking small freedoms within the strict framework. The church is not just a spiritual guide, but a political and social institution that holds sway over nearly every aspect of life. You attend funerals with prayers for the dead, believing that proper rites help souls find peace. Baptisms and weddings are celebrated with ceremony, marking life's milestones under the church's watchful eye. Every part of your day carries a religious weight. You cross yourself before eating. You dip your fingers in holy water when entering a church or even your own home. Certain entertainments or gatherings are forbidden. Women, in particular, face harsh scrutiny, with strict rules on modesty and conduct enforced by both clergy and society. Breaking these rules risks scandal, punishment, or exclusion. You attend Mass not only to fulfill your duty, but to avoid gossip or suspicion. You confess your sins regularly, not only the big ones, but the small slips, the harsh words, or even thoughts deemed inappropriate. The priest listens, offers penance, and absolves you, but the act reinforces the constant surveillance of your soul. This daily ritual reminds you that every action, every intention, is observed by a higher power. Skipping church might mark you as immoral or rebellious, a dangerous label in a community tightly bound by faith. You learn to fear sin and damnation from a young age. The threat of eternal punishment weighs heavily on your mind, influencing how you act towards others. Charity and kindness are virtues praised, but hypocrisy, gossip, and pride are sins that can isolate you from the community. The church is a powerful force that enforces social norms and expectations, often in ways more immediate and tangible than secular laws. Confession is a routine part of your life, not just a private moment, but a social necessity. The church's moral teachings also shape behavior in very concrete ways. The presence of the clergy is everywhere, from the humble parish priest to the influential monks and nuns running schools and hospitals. Religious festivals and rituals bring the community together, offering moments of celebration amid the harsh realities of city life. Superstition and belief in miracles coexist with formal doctrine. You might light candles for protection, carry charms, or seek the blessing of relics. At times, the church's influence can be oppressive. Its strict codes regulate behavior, from what you wear to who you associate with. However, the church also offers comfort and community. The tension between personal faith and institutional power is always present. As you navigate Renaissance Florence, the church's shadow is inescapable. You quickly learn that water in Renaissance Florence is both a blessing and a burden. Clean, fresh water is a rare treasure in a city where the infrastructure for sanitation barely exists, and where beliefs about bathing and cleanliness complicate how people care for their bodies. Some fountains pull from clean mountain springs, their clear, cold water prized by residents. Others tap into shallower sources or even water that has been stagnant too long, making it risky to drink without boiling or filtering. When you visit the market or a tavern, you notice many people prefer wine or beer to water, not just for taste, but because fermented drinks are often safer than unboiled water. Instead of showers or baths, you might use a damp cloth or sponge to wipe off dirt, sweat, and grime. As a result, many rely on perfumes, powders, and scented oils to mask odors rather than wash them away. These fragrances fill the air at markets and social gatherings, but they are thin disguises for the less pleasant realities beneath. These quick cleansings help, but they cannot remove all the layers of dust, soot, and oils that accumulate from working in the narrow, smoke-filled streets or around the fire-heated homes. Medical theory of the day emphasizes balancing the humors, the body's vital fluids, and many think that bathing disrupts this balance. Doctors and apothecaries advise moderation, recommending small washes rather than full baths. Some treatments even use mud, oils, or powders to protect the skin from environmental harms rather than water. Some wealthier households may have tubs for occasional baths, but even then, the water is often reused or unheated, making bathing a rare and uncomfortable event rather than a refreshing ritual. Wealthier Florentines have access to private wells, cisterns, and servants who can manage household cleanliness. People collect rainwater where they can, store it carefully, and use it sparingly. Water is vital, yet dangerous, cleansing yet feared. Bathing is a luxury and a risk. The city's inadequate sanitation infrastructure compounds the problem, making the simplest act of staying clean a daily challenge. This scarcity affects cooking, washing, and even watering plants or animals. The air you breathe, the water you drink, and the streets you walk all remind you of the fragility of life in this bustling but precarious city. To thrive here requires careful attention to where you source your water, how you manage your hygiene, and how you navigate a world where cleanliness is both a necessity and a challenge. You learn to prioritize how and when to use your precious supply. They might afford imported soaps or scented waters. The poor, meanwhile, must rely on public fountains, shared tubs, or makeshift facilities. Their exposure to filth is greater, increasing vulnerability to disease. The logic is simple. Alcohol kills many bacteria, while water drawn from polluted sources might carry sickness. As you go about your daily life, you are acutely aware that water is central to survival, but also a source of fear, suspicion, and sometimes disease. Instead, waste is deposited in cesspits or thrown into the streets and rivers. Night soil collectors sometimes empty these pits, but their services are irregular, and many pits overflow or seep into the ground. This contamination affects wells and fountains, increasing the risk of waterborne illnesses. You avoid drinking from unknown sources and always keep an eye on the condition of your neighborhood's water supply. Your first challenge is finding safe water to drink. Public fountains and wells are scattered throughout the city, but the water they provide varies widely in quality. Using them involves risk, both of catching disease and of encountering unsavory characters in dark, cramped spaces. Herbal rinses, vinegar washes, and steam treatments are used to cleanse the body or the air. Women may use scented herbs in their laundry or sprinkle rosewater in their homes. Religious rituals often include washing hands and faces before prayer, reinforcing a spiritual as well as physical sense of cleanliness. Most people simply relieve themselves in alleyways or gardens, contributing to the city's sanitation problems. This concern over water quality is only the beginning. The city's streets are a labyrinth of open gutters, cesspits, and overflowing waste. Human and animal waste often run freely through channels that crisscross beneath your feet or spill into open ditches. Rain washes this filth into the streets and courtyards where you walk. The stench is constant and overwhelming, at times rotten, sour, and pungent, reminding you of how precarious the city's cleanliness really is. Bathing, which you might assume to be a straightforward way to stay clean and healthy, is far more complicated here. Unlike in ancient Rome or other places with public baths, Renaissance Florentines approach bathing with a mixture of tradition, superstition, and caution. Many believe that bathing during times of illness or cold weather can open the pores and invite sickness. This belief often means people avoid washing regularly, especially during the harsh winters or when plagues strike the city. For you, this means daily hygiene is not a simple task. The fear of bathing extends beyond personal hygiene. You hear stories that cold water causes illness or that too much washing can weaken the body's natural defenses. Sewage disposal is another major concern. Florence lacks a comprehensive sewer system. You also notice that public latrines are rare and usually located outside the city walls or near major markets. Despite these challenges, some innovations and practices help manage hygiene. Your understanding of hygiene is shaped not only by what you see, but by the knowledge and beliefs of the time. You also come to appreciate how water and hygiene intersect with class. Throughout the city, water shortages during dry seasons force strict rationing. You realize that the relationship between water, hygiene, and health in Renaissance Florence is complex and fraught with contradictions. In this environment, personal cleanliness becomes an act of constant negotiation between cultural beliefs, physical realities, and survival. Growing up in Renaissance, Florence was a world very different from what you might expect today. As a child, your life was marked by responsibilities, strict discipline, and the constant presence of the adult world. Education was important for some, but even then, it was strict and limited mostly to boys from wealthier families. Instead, you were expected to contribute to the household as soon as you were able. By the time you were 7 or 8 years old, you might be sent to work as an apprentice, helper, or servant. Bread was a staple, sometimes accompanied by beans or porridge, while meat was a rare treat saved for special occasions. Diseases spread quickly in crowded homes and streets, and children were especially vulnerable. Respect for elders was demanded, and disobedience was punished harshly. Your parents and older siblings taught you manners, religious practices, and the skills you needed for adulthood. If you were born into a wealthy family, your education might include Latin, music, and the arts. You shared cramped quarters with many relatives, had little schooling, and worked from an early age. Boys might become apprentices in workshops or learn trades from their fathers, while girls were often tasked with household duties or sent to work as servants. Education for girls was minimal, focused mostly on preparing them for marriage and running a home. Play and leisure were secondary to these responsibilities. You learned trades like weaving, shoemaking, or street vending, often under tough conditions. Childhood innocence was scarce, and the city's hardships were part of your daily reality. You had tutors, access to books, and opportunities to learn skills that prepared you for life as a noble or merchant. Your days were long, your tasks many, and your freedoms limited. Yet you also found moments of laughter, learning, and belonging amid the city's noise and complexity. This formative experience was a key thread in the vibrant tapestry of Renaissance life, a life far removed from the comforts and protections many enjoy today. Your clothing was better, and you had access to healthier food and cleaner living conditions. But even in privileged households, childhood was not entirely carefree. Florence was bustling and noisy, but also dirty and chaotic. You took part in religious festivals, enjoyed storytelling, and found pleasure in simple games and friendships. The city's vibrant culture, with its art, music, and bustling markets, provided a rich backdrop to your daily life. You learned quickly that childhood was a stage of preparation, discipline, and resilience. While the modern idea of childhood as a protected and carefree time was unknown here, the experiences you gathered shaped who you would become. You carried the lessons of faith, labor, and community into adulthood, ready to face the city's challenges head-on. You might glimpse the works of great artists, or hear the latest news from travelers passing through, inspiring dreams beyond the narrow streets you knew. You knew to avoid certain neighborhoods after dark, to watch out for aggressive animals or strangers, and to keep your belongings close. Injuries from accidents or scuffles were frequent, and you learned early to be tough and resilient. Expectations were high, and you faced pressures to behave properly, study hard, and prepare for your future role in society. Your mother might instruct you in cooking, sewing, or household chores, while your father taught you a trade or helped you prepare for apprenticeship. Neighbors, relatives, and guild members formed a network that supported you through hardships. Celebrations, marriages, and church events brought people together and reinforced bonds. If you became sick, your family might rely on herbal remedies, prayers, or local healers. The church's influence was everywhere, and you were taught to fear divine punishment while striving to live a good Christian life. Religious festivals and feast days broke up the routine, offering some moments of celebration and community. But even these were infused with solemnity and instruction. Hospitals existed, but they were few and often reserved for the very poor or those with severe conditions. You grew up knowing that sickness was always nearby, and that survival wasn't guaranteed. Malnutrition was common among poorer children, and you might go hungry or suffer from stomach illnesses due to contaminated food or water. Despite these hardships, children were expected to eat what was given without complaint, learning early the value of endurance. Your days were filled with chores, fetching water, tending animals, or assisting in workshops and markets. Work was a way of life, and being a child meant taking on serious tasks that helped your family survive. If you were born into a merchant or artisan family, your schooling might involve learning reading, writing, and arithmetic, often with a heavy focus on religion and classical texts. The local schools were not places of joy and creativity. Instead, they were governed by rigid discipline, long hours, and strict teachers who expected obedience and memorization above all else. You spent much of your day reciting lessons and praying, with little time for the games or imagination that children today might enjoy. Childhood wasn't a carefree time of play and leisure. It was short, often harsh, and shaped by the needs of family, work, and survival. From a very young age, you were expected to learn your place in society and prepare for the role you would play as an adult. For most children, especially those from working class or poor families, education was a luxury you didn't get. Your playtime was limited and often took place in the cramped, noisy streets of Florence. There, you might play simple games with other children, perhaps rolling hoops, jumping rope, or chasing each other in alleyways. But these moments were fleeting. The dangers of city life were never far away. You had to be wary of pickpockets, rowdy adults, and the filth that coated the streets. There was little supervision, and you learned early how to navigate this complex and sometimes hostile environment. Food was another challenge for children. Meals were often modest and repetitive, Health was a constant concern. Without modern medicine, childhood illnesses could be severe and frightening. Family life was central to your world. You were part of an extended household where multiple generations often lived together in a small space. Religious education shaped much of your upbringing. You attended Mass regularly, learned prayers, and heard sermons about sin, virtue, and the afterlife. Social class had a huge impact on your childhood experience. On the other hand, if your family was poor or working class, your life was defined by survival. Child labor was common and accepted. The dangers of the city were also part of your childhood awareness. Despite these challenges, childhood in Florence was not without moments of joy and wonder. Your relationship with family and community was also a source of strength. In essence, growing up in Renaissance Florence was a balancing act between work and play, danger and safety, hardship and celebration. Living as a child in Florence was a test of endurance and adaptability. Clothing in Renaissance Florence was never just about keeping warm or covering your body. It was a statement, a symbol of your status, your wealth, and sometimes even your morality. But living in those times, you quickly realized that fashion was often uncomfortable, restrictive. Heavy wool was a staple fabric, thick and coarse compared to what modern materials offer. Ruffs, the stiff, pleated collars that became fashionable later in the Renaissance, were especially uncomfortable, pushing up against your neck and limiting how freely you could move your head. These laws regulated what colors, fabrics, and styles you were allowed to wear based on your social rank. These fabrics were beautiful but demanding. They required careful maintenance and were often heavy or hot, especially in summer months. The bright colors were achieved with natural dyes made from plants, minerals, or insects, which could fade or stain your skin. Wearing such clothing made you stand out in the crowd, but also required servants to help dress and undress you, adding a level of dependency you hadn't known before. As someone living in Renaissance Florence, you had to be careful. Hats were essential for sun and rain protection, but could be heavy or cumbersome. Stains from food, soot, or dirt were common, and removing them required careful scrubbing with soap made from animal fat or plant oils. Rain and snow soaked through many fabrics, leaving you wet and chilled. Keeping dry and warm was essential, yet often impossible, especially for those working outdoors or traveling through the city. You might rely on natural bleaching from sunlight to brighten fabrics, but this took time and patience. By restricting who could wear what, rulers ensured that the lines between classes remained clear and that social ambition was kept in check. You learned to navigate these rules carefully. What you wore was a signal not only of your wealth, but of your place in the hierarchy. Each stitch and fabric choice carried meaning, marking you as noble or commoner, rich or poor. But beneath the beautiful silks and ornate designs was the reality of stiff collars, heavy layers, and garments that demanded patience and endurance. Gloves, belts, and jewelry might be worn by the wealthy to display status, but for many, they were rare luxuries. Fashion was both a privilege and a burden, a way to express identity and belonging, but also a constant challenge to your physical ease and freedom. Footwear was often basic, with leather shoes or boots that weren't particularly comfortable or suited for long walks on cobbled streets. Men's fashion emphasized broad shoulders and narrow waists, achieved through padding and stiff fabrics. Parents dressed their children carefully to reflect family status, knowing that clothing was an important social currency. These styles symbolized ideals of beauty and status, but often sacrificed comfort and practicality. You might wear wool and linen, with simpler cuts and fewer decorations, but these were exceptions. Most days, you balanced the desire to look respectable with the realities of comfort, cost, and the need to work. You wore whatever was affordable, often coarse wool, patched garments handed down or mended repeatedly. Your clothes might be rough, itchy, and worn thin, They offered little protection against the elements and were prone to becoming dirty and smelly in the city's cramped, dusty conditions. Despite this, you had to maintain a presentable appearance for work and social expectations. Rags might be your reality, but you kept them as clean and intact as possible. Your colors were more muted and fabrics less expensive. These clothes still needed care, but you likely made or repaired them yourself or with help from family. Your attire allowed you to work and move more freely than nobles, but the weight and stiffness of wool still meant discomfort on long days. Wearing silks, furs, or expensive dyes like deep purple without permission could bring fines or public shame. These laws were designed to maintain clear distinctions between the wealthy elite, the middle classes, and the working poor. For boys, this might mean small doublets and hose. For girls, simple gowns. Hand-me-downs were common, and clothing was often adapted as children grew. Yet the fabric weight and tight fits didn't make movement easy, especially as kids learned to play and run. Your outfit was a visible signal of where you fit in society, and breaking those rules could lead to trouble. Even before ruffs became popular, tight collars and laced bodices were common. These styles reflected the latest fashions, but weren't designed for comfort or ease. They showed off your family's status, but also reminded you of the rigid social structures you lived within. It was excellent at keeping out the cold, but it could also weigh you down and make movement difficult, especially when you layered several pieces for warmth. You might wear a linen shirt beneath a woolen doublet, over which came a padded jerkin, topped with a cloak or mantle. Each layer added bulk and warmth, but also stiffness. Walking, bending, or working in such clothing was no easy task. You learned to adjust your movements and accept that discomfort was part of daily life, and closely controlled by strict laws that limited what you could wear depending on your social class. From the moment you dressed each day, you felt the weight of your garments. The collars and necklines of your garments often felt tight and restricting. Clothing was more than just personal choice. It was governed by sumptuary laws. If you were from a wealthy family, your clothes were likely made from rich materials, velvets, fine wool, silk, and embroidered linen. For those in the middle class, your clothing was more practical, but still aimed to show respectability. If you were poor or working class, your clothing was simple and utilitarian. Dressing children was also a challenge. You wanted your young ones to be neat and respectable, but their clothes had to be durable. Accessories, while sometimes decorative, added to the struggle. Maintaining these garments was a constant task. Washing was difficult due to limited water supply and poor sanitation, so clothes often smelled of sweat, smoke, and city odors. Weather added another layer of difficulty. Wool was great for cold months, but could be hot and itchy during summer. Linen was lighter but less durable. Fashion also reflected gender roles and expectations. Women's clothing was generally more restrictive, with corsets, tight bodices, and long skirts that limited movement and required careful walking. Social occasions and religious festivals were moments when you dressed in your finest, adding embroidery, ribbons, and sometimes even furs. Sumptuary laws weren't just about clothing. They were a reflection of the social order and control. For children, these rules also applied. Boys and girls wore simplified versions of adult clothes appropriate to their social rank. In many ways, fashion in Renaissance Florence was a daily reminder of the city's complex social fabric. You learned to accept that discomfort was part of appearance and social survival. Living as a woman in Renaissance Florence meant stepping into a world where your life was largely shaped and controlled by others, often from a very young age. From the moment you were born, expectations were placed on you for how you behaved, what you learned, and especially who you would marry. Your future was rarely your own to choose, and your roles were tightly prescribed within the household and society. You became responsible for managing the home, supervising servants if you were lucky enough to have any, and overseeing daily chores. This could include everything from cooking and cleaning to weaving cloth and sewing garments for your family. Unlike men who could roam the streets, conduct business, or attend social events with relative ease, women's movements were closely watched and often limited. You might be expected to remain at home during the day, venturing out only for necessary errands, church attendance, or special occasions, always accompanied by a family member or chaperone to protect your reputation. Being alone in public could bring gossip or worse, damaging your family's standing. As managers of the home, you controlled day-to-day life, from what was cooked to how servants were treated. In wealthier families, women sometimes handled business affairs during their husband's absence or widowhood. Personal freedoms were sacrificed for the sake of family honor and stability. Gossip, reputation, and appearances mattered deeply, shaping how you dressed, behaved, and interacted with neighbors and relatives. Support networks among women, such as neighbors, relatives, or guilds for widows, could provide some relief, but these were informal and limited. Some women engaged in charitable work or patronage of the arts, gaining respect and recognition for their contributions. Your days were filled with hard work, careful social navigation, and a constant effort to maintain honor and respectability. Your story, like many women's of the time, is one of quiet endurance and invisible strength, a side of Renaissance, Florence that is often forgotten, but was vital to its history. Though the world around you was male-dominated, women found ways to leave their mark through family, religion, and community. Education, skilled trades, and public offices were almost entirely closed to women. Your options for independence were limited, with most women relying on family or marriage for support. Widowhood could be a turning point, offering a rare chance for autonomy, but many lived their whole lives under male authority. The expectations were high. A good wife was diligent, obedient, and devoted to her husband and children. If widowed, you might gain some control over your dowry or belongings, but otherwise, your economic power was tied to the men in your life. Behind the scenes, their labor, management, and social connections kept families and communities functioning. The resilience, adaptability, and strength required to live as a woman in Renaissance Florence are often overlooked, but essential to understanding the era. Marriage contracts often ensured that your husband managed finances, and you had little say over household wealth or business dealings. You were expected to uphold the family's honor through your behavior and appearance, avoiding scandal at all costs. Producing heirs, especially sons, was critical for continuing family lines and securing futures. Pregnancy, childbirth, and childrearing occupied much of your time and energy. Despite the dangers and discomforts of childbirth, you were expected to bear many children if possible. Raising children also meant teaching them social and religious values, preparing daughters for the same domestic life you lived, and sons for their public roles. If you've ever wondered what it was like to be a woman in this time, prepare to enter a life full of strict limitations, duties, and little freedom. Marriage was perhaps the most defining event of a woman's life. The Church's teachings reinforced ideas of female virtue and submission, but also provided women with roles as nuns, where they could pursue education and some autonomy. Many women found meaning in religious devotion, attending Mass regularly, and participating in festivals and rituals. Saints' lives and religious stories offered examples of ideal womanhood, but also occasional models of strength and independence. Unlike today, where love might be the focus, marriages were arranged by families with an eye towards social standing, wealth, and alliances. As a girl, you might not have any say in who you married or when. In many cases, marriage happened quite young, sometimes in your early teens, because families sought to secure bonds quickly and produce heirs. Your parents, especially your father, would negotiate dowries and contracts, leaving you little choice. The idea of romantic love was often secondary or absent altogether in these arrangements. Once married, your life revolved primarily around the household. Education for women was limited. While noble or wealthy girls might learn to read, write, or play musical instruments, most girls were taught domestic skills rather than academic subjects. Literacy rates among women were low, especially outside the elite. Your learning would focus on running a household efficiently and preparing for marriage. The church also played a role in shaping your upbringing, emphasizing virtues like piety, chastity, and obedience. Social freedom for women was restricted. Your legal rights were minimal compared to men's. Property ownership, for instance, was largely controlled by your husband or father. Women rarely inherited land or money independently. Childbearing was a central duty and source of status for women. Despite these constraints, women found ways to express themselves and wield influence within the household and community. Religion was both a source of comfort and control. Daily life for women involved constant work and vigilance. You balanced household duties with caring for children and managing social expectations. The strict gender roles also meant that opportunities outside the home were rare. In times of crisis, illness, economic hardship, or family disputes, women often bore the brunt but had few legal means to protect themselves. Despite the challenges, women played crucial roles in shaping Florentine society. You would learn early that your life was defined by limits on movement, choice, and voice, but also by a deep commitment to family, faith, and tradition. In this world, survival meant acceptance of your role, patience with hardships, and finding small freedoms within the confines set by society.
Living in Renaissance Florence, one of the most constant and terrifying threats you faced was fire. Unlike today's cities, where fire departments rush to emergencies with trucks and hoses, Florence was a city built mostly from wood and other flammable materials, packed tightly together along narrow streets and alleys. But managing these flames was dangerous, especially since buildings were close together, often sharing walls and wooden beams. If one fire started, it could quickly jump from rooftop to rooftop, igniting whole blocks before anyone could stop it. The risk of a devastating fire was ever present, and many people lived with a deep, knowing fear that their home, their possessions, or even their entire neighborhood could be consumed by flames in an instant. Simple mistakes could have disastrous consequences: an overturned lamp, a spark landing on dry wood, or unattended embers left smoldering could ignite a destructive blaze. Narrow streets could quickly become choke points, making escape difficult if a fire spread. Fires could force entire families and communities to flee with little notice, losing everything they owned in moments. Entire neighborhoods sometimes had to be rebuilt from ashes. Everywhere you looked, open flames were in use. Candles lit homes at night. Hearth fires warmed kitchens and living spaces, and torches illuminate streets and public events after sunset. You learned to keep flammable objects away from open flames, to never leave fires unattended, and to store valuable items safely. Knowing multiple escape routes from your home and neighborhood could mean the difference between safety and disaster. Many people kept only what they could carry easily nearby, in case they had to flee suddenly. Alongside poverty, disease, and crowded living conditions, the threat of losing everything in a blaze was a constant shadow. The vigilance and community spirit required to fight fires and rebuild after them were crucial to survival. The sound of a fire alarm or the shout of fire was enough to send the city into a chaotic scramble. From the kitchen's open hearth, where meals were prepared, to the workshops where candles were made or metal was forged, managing flames carefully was a skill you learned early. The bucket brigades, the rebuilding efforts, and the shared experience of loss and recovery forged strong bonds among the city's resilience in the face of repeated fires demonstrated the determination of its people to protect their homes and way of life. Fire accidents were common, and their consequences were harsh but often unavoidable. But for you, in Renaissance Florence, fire was one of the greatest dangers to daily life, demanding constant vigilance, quick action, and a deep respect for the power of open flames. It was a risk that shaped everything, from how you built your home to how you cooked, and even how you lived as a member of a community forever aware that disaster could strike at any moment. Families might keep important documents or heirlooms in stone or metal chests that offered some protection. Regulations controlled the storage of flammable materials and the types of fires allowed at night. People were encouraged or required to keep fire buckets ready, and some districts had night watchmen tasked with spotting and reporting fires early. Despite these efforts, fires were common and devastating. The design of Renaissance Florence made controlling fire extremely difficult. Such events left a lasting mark on collective memory and heightened the urgency of fire prevention. The rebuilding after fires often involves stricter building code, encouraging stone construction over wood and wider streets where possible to help limit fire spread. But change was slow, and much of the city remained vulnerable. Streets were narrow and winding, which helped with defense, but limited access for firefighting efforts. However, this method required quick coordination and enough people willing and able to help. If the fire started at night or in a poor neighborhood, help might come too late. The repeated destruction and rebuilding created opportunities for architectural innovation and urban planning. Even if limited, public fountains, wells, and cisterns were vital not only for daily life, but also as resources to combat fire. Fire also influenced how buildings were constructed, with wealthier residents investing in stone walls, tiled roofs, and iron window grates to reduce risk. Many residents also lacked adequate equipment or training, so even when people tried, they could do little against the large blaze. Water sources existed, but there were no organized water mains or hydrants to connect hoses to. Instead, water had to be carried in buckets, often from wells or public fountains, a slow and inefficient process in emergencies. Firefighting itself was a communal effort. When a fire broke out, neighbors and passersby rushed to help, forming bucket brigades to pass water along a human chain. The fear of fire shaped daily life. You were constantly aware of the dangers when lighting a candle, cooking over an open flame, or warming yourself by the fire. Fire was not only a danger to your home and belongings, but also to lives. City authorities tried to manage fire risks by imposing rules. One of the most infamous disasters was the Great Fire of 1472, which destroyed large parts of Florence's city center. Living with the constant threat of fire meant you had to develop habits of caution and preparedness. You also had to be ready to act quickly if a fire broke out. While fire was a destructive force, it also shaped the city's character and development. For ordinary people, the fear of fire added to the many hardships of Renaissance urban life. In your daily routine, fire danger was never fun. Despite the fear and the losses, fire also brought neighbors together. Today, it might be hard to imagine living without modern fire safety measures.
In Renaissance Florence, the markets were the beating heart of city life, pulsing with activity from early morning until late afternoon. For you, stepping into a market square was an assault on the senses, a whirlwind of sights, sounds, and smells that could overwhelm even the most seasoned visitor. Vendors shouted over each other to advertise their wares, their voices rising and falling in a constant din. Children ran between stalls, laughing and screaming, adding their voices to the noise. The clatter of wooden carts being pulled over cobblestones and the clopping of horse hooves mingled with all this, creating a layered soundtrack of market life. Each merchant tried to outdo the others with colorful calls. Fresh figs, sweet figs from the countryside, or the finest olives, pressed this morning. Trash and spoiled food frequently littered the ground, attracting flies and other pests that added to the unsanitary conditions. The narrow aisles meant that bumping into people was inevitable, and pickpockets took advantage of the confusion. You might see wealthy merchants dressed in fine clothes, negotiating deals with local farmers, or women buying ingredients for dinner while exchanging news and advice. A market was also a place to see rare or imported goods, fabrics dyed in rich colors, exotic fruits, or intricate pottery, bringing a taste of the wider world to your doorstep. You'd hear stories and warnings from locals about being alert, guarding your purse, and watching for suspicious behavior in the crowd. They provided fresh food and goods to the population and helped connect Florence to regional and international trade networks. And focus on your purpose, whether buying groceries, selling wares, or simply moving through the space safely. It was a place where daily survival mixed with opportunity, where danger lurked alongside community, and where the city's true character could be felt most strongly. The markets demanded your full attention, quick reflexes, and street smarts, or how the noise levels fluctuated from the early morning calm to the midday frenzy, and then the slow winding down by evening. The marketplace was never truly silent or still. It was always alive with sound and movement. The market's noisy, smelly, chaotic nature was simply part of its character, reflecting the energy and diversity of a city on the rise. You would need to cover your nose at times or risk being overwhelmed by the combination of odors. These cries created a dense fog of sound that hung in the air like smoke, making it hard to focus or even think clearly. You'd smell the fresh scent of herbs and flowers from nearby stalls, mingling with the spicy aroma of exotic spices brought from far-off lands like pepper, cinnamon, and cloves. These pleasant odors contrasted sharply with more pungent ones. The stench of fresh fish laid out on ice or straw mingled with the unmistakable odor of livestock, goats, pigs, and chickens all nearby. These markets were where people gathered not only to buy and sell goods, but also to catch up on the latest news, gossip, and politics. Early morning brought fresher scents, while by afternoon, the odors of refuse and sweat became more pronounced. Street cleaners and waste collectors worked hard, but could never fully keep up with the pace of the market's refuse. But for a newcomer, or even a local unaccustomed to the chaos, the experience could be disorienting, exhausting, and at times downright stressful. Bargaining was an essential part of the experience, with customers calling out prices and vendors refusing to lower theirs without a fight. This shouting match could last several minutes, attracting the attention of passers-by who often paused to watch the drama unfold. You might find yourself caught up in a bidding war or called upon to judge who was getting the better deal. The moment you entered the market, you were hit by a cacophony of noise. Street performers and musicians often added to the soundscape. A lute player might strum a lively tune nearby, or a juggler could call for a crowd, mixing entertainment with commerce. Amidst this auditory chaos, merchants and buyers haggled loudly. But it wasn't just the noise that made markets overwhelming. The smells were equally intense and often less pleasant. The smell of sweat and unwashed bodies from the dense crowds mixed with the odor of horse manure in the streets, creating a strong, sometimes choking miasma. Market stalls themselves were tightly packed, with barely enough space for you to pass without brushing against baskets of vegetables, hanging cuts of meat, or crates of freshly baked bread. Despite the challenges, the markets were vibrant centers of commerce and social life. For all their sensory overload, markets were essential to city life. As you moved through the crowds, you might notice the rhythms of market day, how certain stalls attracted larger crowds at specific times. The smells, too, changed as the day progressed. Living with such sensory intensity required resilience and adaptability. Over time, you learned to tune out the overwhelming noise. In many ways, the market experience was a microcosm of Renaissance Florence itself, bustling, competitive, diverse, and alive. In Renaissance Florence, politics wasn't something distant or abstract. It was woven deeply into every aspect of daily life, shaping your chances of survival, your social standing, and even your safety. Powerful families like the Medici held immense influence, controlling wealth, government, and alliances behind the scenes. To understand what it meant to live in Florence at this time, you need to grasp how these family dynamics and political intrigues affected ordinary people like you. The city was divided into factions that aligned with different families and interests. These rivalries sometimes erupted into public unrest or behind-the-scenes power struggles. You might find yourself caught in the middle, pressured to choose sides or suffer consequences for perceived disloyalty. You would have heard rumors of plots against the Medici or other influential families, secret meetings in shadowy corners of the city, and the use of spies to uncover rivals' plans. Clergy members often supported particular families, and church festivals or sermons could carry political messages. By funding magnificent buildings, sculptures, and paintings, they shaped Florence's cultural identity and reinforced their image as rightful rulers. You might pass by a public square or church and feel the weight of this influence as art and politics merged. Public rituals became stages where power was displayed and contested. You risked losing your livelihood, social standing, or protection from the law. Even accusations, true or false, could lead to exile or imprisonment. The complexity of these political games made Florence a city of constant change and unpredictability. Your support helps keep these stories alive and makes it possible to keep creating rich, detailed content for history lovers everywhere. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring. Navigating this world required careful judgment, discretion, and sometimes sacrifice. As a citizen, attending these events was not just about faith, but also about showing allegiance. Living with this ever-present atmosphere of suspicion could be unsettling. It wasn't just the streets, the work, or the smells. It was living within a web of alliances, rivalries, and ambitions that touched every aspect of your life. The Medici family were the city's most famous power brokers. They amassed incredible wealth through banking and trade, using their money to influence elections, fund artists, and place allies in key government positions. Elections to public office were often controlled by patronage networks rather than open competition. If you were ambitious, gaining a patron's support was essential to advancing politically or economically. Without it, your prospects were limited. You would have seen their symbol everywhere, from public buildings to churches, and even in artworks commissioned around the city. Conversely, being on the wrong side could mean exclusion from guilds, difficulty selling goods, or worse, social ostracism. From the bustling markets and narrow alleys to the influence of powerful families like the Medici, you've seen why life in this vibrant city was as complex as it was challenging. If you enjoyed exploring the sights, sounds, and struggles of Renaissance Florence, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss out on more immersive historical journeys like this. Even your personal relationships might be influenced by these dynamics, as marriages were often arranged to strengthen alliances between families. Their patronage helped Florence flourish culturally, but it also meant their favor was crucial if you wanted to thrive. Living in Florence meant you couldn't ignore politics. Even if you weren't wealthy or noble, political disputes could affect your daily life. For merchants and craftsmen, aligning with the right family could secure lucrative contracts or protection from unfair taxes or legal troubles. The city's government, though technically a republic, was heavily influenced by these powerful families. At times, political tensions boiled over into violence or conspiracies. Religion and politics were closely linked, too. The Medici's patronage of the arts was part of their strategy to legitimize power. Getting on the wrong side of these power structures could have serious consequences. Despite the risks, many Florentines learned to maneuver within this system, forging relationships, making deals, and using influence to secure their place. Understanding this intricate dance of power gives you a clearer picture of why surviving a day in Renaissance Florence was so challenging. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Renaissance Florence, where every street, home, and moment was shaped by the weight of history, power, and daily survival. Don't forget to like and share if you found this fascinating, And leave a comment telling me what part surprised you the most, or what era you'd like to explore next. Thanks again for watching. And remember, history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the people who lived it and seeing how their stories connect to ours today.